feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut off?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. There's no slacking on this channel. We're going to be going through the whole of the summer, even though Parliament is in recess, to bring you the latest political stories. Of course, today we're going to have a lot of analysis of Thursday's set of by-elections. A little bit surprising, actually, compared to where we thought we were last week. I'm going to be speaking to Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg after that by-election defeat in the seat next door. Does he fear losing his seat to the Lib Dems at the general election? James Schneider's going to also be joining me. That's Jeremy Corbyn's former communications director, because despite that record win in Selby for Labour, infighting has once again broken out after they failed to win Uxbridge. There's also this huge debate now about the ULEZ. I'm going to be speaking to the Lib Dems' Christine Jardine too. They had this huge win in Somerton and Frome, but is that going to translate into more seats at the next election, or is it just a protest vote to the Lib Dems? And I'm going to be speaking to the Planning Minister Lee Rowley after those bruising defeats for the Tories. What has the government got to say for itself? We'll be intrigued to hear from him. Now, let's go to the front pages and run you through them very quickly. Front of the Telegraph has got an interview with Michael Gove. Net zero can't become a crusade, he says. In the Sunday Times, they focus more on the Labour story. Khan to rethink ULEZ after call with Starmer, they say. The Observer, again, goes with Labour. Sunak and Starmer are warned, don't dump your green pledges. The Mail on Sunday's got an interesting story about a documentary that's been made about Boris Johnson. Vile film claimed Boris lied about nearly dying from COVID. The Sunday Express goes with that story that my fellow presenter, Nigel Farage, has been talking about all week. PM says he will shut woke banks. The Sun on Sunday goes with something completely different. Patsy loves split, about Patsy Kensit. And then we have on the Sunday Mirror, Tory Toff serves fun flower on pic of Cameron. This is the suggestion that a Tory has been snorting cocaine off a portrait or a picture of David Cameron, would you believe? Now, let me bring in Nicholas Owen now, former BBC News presenter, to go through the papers with me. It's very interesting, isn't it, in terms of ULEZ and indeed the by-election very much dominating the news agenda, Nicholas. You'd expect that, but actually, if they hadn't won in Uxbridge or retained Uxbridge, the Tories, actually the Sunday papers would be quite boring.
They would.
This has added a new dilemma.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
we're talking about perhaps a ULEZ U-turn. Sunday Times front page talking about can't to rethink ULEZ. Sunday Telegraph. We've had another U-turn from Michael Gove. Wasn't he the Environment Secretary that was pushing all these policies, Nick?
He was, very much so, under Theresa May. Remember, a previous Prime Minister, but how many? I can't quite remember. Two, I think. Two or three, yes. Yes, indeed, he was very much the apostle, if you like, the man who said by 2050 we have to be net zero. That was what he said, and he kept on saying it. Now, suddenly, he's talking about not turning this whole thing into a religious crusade.
Yeah.
Does that mean to say abandoning such targets? Interesting to me, you know, that Michael Gove. There was this, I'm sure I read, I didn't dream this, somewhere that he, if in the event of a Labour victory at the next election, not to be taken for granted, of course, but if Sir Keir Starmer does become our Prime Minister, he and Michael Gove might sort of see a bit more eye to eye, and Gove might become some sort of Labour advisor or something like that. Perish the thought.
Can you imagine?
Oh,
Yeah,
can you
poacher
imagine?
turned gamekeeper.
But it is interesting that that Michael Gove is willing to come out now and say, oh, hang on, let's just stop and think about this. And in the background, of course, is ULEZ, the great argument in London. I mean, this is really, that's what turned the Uxbridge by-election, of course, on its head, and could do in other parts of the country as well.
I mean, did you think that that was a kind of revolt against Khan? Does it say much about the Tories for them to just retain that seat by 400? Rishi Sunak's gone down there and said, this means that we can't make any predictions for the general election. But it was still a pretty dire picture for the Conservatives.
It was a very close-run thing, wasn't it? Really very, very close-run thing. The word now is that Sunak is going to spend the summer energising the party, sticking to his 5 main principles and all this sort of thing, and whipping people into line. And, well, people into line, you know, just make sure the Tories are sort of speaking with one voice when it comes to the actual election campaign. The election could be just about 12 months away, at most, one would have thought.
We think it's going to be autumn 2024. There was a report in the week to suggest it might be spring 2024, but that could be foolhardy because aren't the Conservatives waiting to make a bit more economic capital? They want inflation to come right down. They want people to feel that they've got more money in their pockets, and that's probably more likely to happen next autumn than it will next spring.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me to be a desperate timetable that's involved here.
Yes.
And in the background, something that didn't seem to get too much of a mention, the extraordinarily large number of Conservative MPs who've already said they're not going to stand for various reasons, know they're going to be beaten or just don't want to do it anymore. So there's an awful lot of things going wrong for the Tories, but really going wrong for them. One or two small things that are not going quite so wrong. A piece of the Sunday Times, Peter Kellner, very respected figure.
The lost Tories' key to 40 seats. And he's making this point that the PM can woo these voters back. They haven't switched to Labour like they did in 1997 when you had Tories already speaking about Tony Blair and this new revolution. They haven't decided on anything. They don't even know if they've decided that they're going to turn out whenever the next general election is.
Well, that's one of the things, particularly the Selby by-election. It was the absence of Tory voters. That was the interesting thing, of the people who just stayed away completely. So if you take the stayaways and you take those who really don't say they don't know yet, you put those two figures together, there's a glimmer of hope for the Conservatives.
Kellner reckons that there are 40 seats where the undecideds are probably the majority view, and therefore, when we look at any of this polling, if we're not including the don't knows, then it's distorting the picture of how far Labour are ahead. Starmer doesn't seem to have captured hearts and minds, Nicholas.
No, he doesn't. And he does have this problem now, particularly the London situation. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, said to be reconsidering the extension of ULEZ.
So weak. I mean, I think Sadiq Khan is a man not without ego. Is he going to start caving into Starmer? What's your instinct on that?
Well, I think it will come down to whether Starmer can really wield the authority within the Labour Party to insist that there be at least that they could delay it, couldn't they? They could go for a further consultation.
That, won't they?
If you well, yes, but if you delay it long enough and say yes, we're really giving this consideration, perhaps the old long grass might just come in handy for Starmer.
Let's just have a very quick look at the summer strategies that both sides are going to deploy. So, on one hand, the Telegraph is reporting that there's going to be true blue boot camps to save Tory's soul. They're also saying in The Sun, gloves are off, Sunak on attack in battle for number 10. Do you think people pay much notice to what either party are doing in the summer?
Well, it goes back to what I said at the beginning about the shortage of time, really.
Yeah.
I mean, these months are going to fly by very, very quickly. I think there's no doubt that if... In Rishi Sunak's position, he's got to get this thing sorted out. He's got to really show toughness now. I mean, I think there's this view of Rishi Sunak that he's somehow a good man in many ways, you know, and hard-working and all the other things. But is he really tough and ruthless enough to really go and sort of rip the heart out of what Labour...
ruthlessly towards Boris Johnson, so there's...
Yes.
It's in him.
Maybe that's...
Can he unleash it?
Yeah.
Let's... I want to ask you about the BBC row involving my colleague and our colleague, sometime Nigel Farage, and the banking situation.
Yes.
Simon Jack, the correspondent that reported this story, that
business editor,
he'd been kind of disbanded from Coutts, banned by Coutts because he didn't have sufficient funds. He did the subject access request, found out it was actually because of his political views. Simon Jack's still refusing to apologise. I mean, I find that quite astonishing, because as a journalist, if you get it wrong, you have to say mea culpa.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the dear old... the broken biscuit company. Have I used that word before?
Is that how you're describing it these days?
When I worked at the BBC, I loved them dearly. But I did call them the broken biscuit company because the way it is run, or rather inefficiently run.
Yeah.
This is another classic example we had with the whole terrible Hugh Edwards saga. So much of the blame there is the BBC's reaction to things, how it gets on with things. This is another classic to me. As soon as it was evident, let's be honest, Simon Jack is a jolly good journalist, jolly good at his job, and he sits next to a banker who gives him a line on the Nigel Farage story. Well, of course he's going to go with that. It's a jolly good source.
Yes.
But if that source turns out to be wrong. The facts are simply the other way around, as Nigel himself has now discovered in great detail. Then, for goodness sake, just put your hands up and say...
Why can't the BBC handle any of these crises well?
And why, Simon, come on, lad, just say, sorry, got that wrong. Yes, it turns out that my source was, trying to cover something up, which is what it looks like, doesn't it?
Very much so.
And that in itself is, puts you at the heart of a jolly good story, shows you have jolly good instincts. Sometimes those instincts are proved to be wrong. Go out there and say it, admit it, and get on with it. But the BBC... it moves so slow.
I know, it's
the broken biscuits.
Glacial, but also it's just not, I don't know, the comms reaction to a lot of the stories. We haven't had a newspaper review in the last 6 to 8 weeks, probably beyond, that hasn't featured one BBC crisis or another. It's just extraordinary. Very, very quick word on what I'm calling the great fat Britons of the day story. Yes. Sunday Times. Green man slows down to help unfit pedestrians keep up. Come on now.
Well, yes.
We get enough time to cross the road. Apparently people are now too obese to get across the road quickly.
Well, it is two things. Let's be clear about this. It's not only you get 6.5 seconds, I think, and they want to make it 7.1 seconds, a 20% increase in the green man so that you can get across. But I'm afraid it's not just because apparently we have a population which is obese and getting unfit and can't cross the road. It's also for elderly folk. There are more and more of us around, and we find it a bit of a struggle.
Not necessarily the fatties.
No, exactly.
Am I allowed to say that anymore? Probably not, no.
I don't think you are. But you know what gets my goat? It's the fact that everybody, young, old, whatever they are now, almost everybody under the age of about 50, always walk up to the traffic lights. Oh, always press the button, whether there's traffic around or not. And that, I think, this sort of, we can't be trusted to sort of mind our own way crossing the road.
It's nanny state on steroids, perhaps.
Yes.
Nicholas Owen, as ever, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm afraid our time is up together, but thank you very much for coming in on this Sunday morning.
Went past so fast.
I know, it always does. It always does. Now, the People's Panel is in the perfect location this week because we've gone to Selby and Ainsty after that big loss for the Tories. Catherine Forster is there. Catherine, delighted to see you in Selby. What questions have your panellists got for our guests today?
Yes, good morning, Camilla, from Selby in Yorkshire, God's own county. Well, I am from Yorkshire, I would say that. But of course, this is the site of that massive Labour win on Friday when they overturned a 20,000 majority, electing the youngest MP, aged just 25. Let's talk now to Helen, who is the manager of the Hub. Helen, thank you very much indeed for having us today.
You're welcome.
How's business at the moment?
Really good. Soaring, yeah. Good loyal customers that keep us going, keep the doors open.
That's good to hear, and I know you make all your own cakes, so we'll be sampling those later. Let's talk now to our panel. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for talking to us today. Carl, if I can come to you first, you're an accountant. You live about 20 minutes out of the centre of Selby in this constituency. You've always been a Conservative voter, but you didn't vote Conservative on Thursday. Tell us why.
No, I didn't really. I'm just disenchanted with them. You know, everything they announce is just waffle. They never seem to get anything done. You know, they're supposed to be getting tough on immigration. It never happens. So it was a bit of a protest vote, really. I voted for reform.
And would you do that in the general election that's coming up?
Well, they've got 12 months to pull their finger out, but really, probably I would not vote for want Labour to get in. So I would vote for the Conservatives probably if it was a general election.
People do vote differently, don't they, in by-elections? And let's talk now to you, David. You were a Conservative councillor on Selby District Council for 8 years. You're a local business owner. You didn't vote Conservative either, did you?
No, I agree really what Carl said. You know, I just couldn't bring myself to vote for them. I think they've let themselves down badly, particularly in the last 12 months. If there's going to be a national election, probably in a year's time, they need to impress me more in the next 12 months. You know, if not, I think they'll lose. But I can't bring myself to vote Labour.
But you were impressed with the candidate, weren't you? He was very present.
I was very, very impressed, yeah. I attended 1 or 2 functions in the last sort of month and he turned up to most. I thought the Labour campaign was very strong. Yeah, so I was impressed with that, but I still wouldn't vote for him.
Yeah, it's estimated that about 20,000 Conservative voters basically sat at home, isn't it? And you two were, or part of the people that didn't vote Conservative. Carl, we were talking a bit about taxes and business. You're an accountant. You've got a question for the politicians on today.
I have, yeah. I'd like to know when they're going to start looking to bring taxes down and encourage people to work. Many business owners can't get staff because there's no incentive for people to work anymore. And they just keep putting taxes up all the time. You know, stealth taxes and backhanded taxes to keep it quiet from people because they don't want bad publicity. But it's just gone too far now and they need to start sorting that out.
And David, we were talking a bit about transport. You've got a question for the politicians coming on today.
I have indeed, yeah. We were promised the earth with HS2, particularly for the north, you know, bringing the north-south levelling up. Now we hear that the south will get their section, but it could be shelved in the north. And to me, you know, it was more important for the north than the south, in my opinion.
Yes. I mean, Boris Johnson got that 80-seat majority, didn't he, largely on promising to level up the country. Do you feel that there's much evidence of levelling up?
No, not what I've seen. And as I say, as you've said, I was 8 years on Selby District Council. We did get a little bit, but we didn't get what I thought we would get. And I think, you know, a promise is a promise, and it's not happened, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the downfalls of the Conservative Party. They had a great opportunity of connecting to the north and getting those valuable votes again, but that won't happen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what happened to levelling up for the north, Camilla, specifically Transport, that Yorkshire link of HS2, that promised high-speed rail from Hull to Liverpool? Liverpool. Interested to hear what the politicians have to say.
Catherine, David and Carl, thank you very much indeed. I'll try and put those questions to the Minister I have on later. And indeed, Jacob Rees-Mogg is coming up in just a minute. Don't forget, if you want to apply to the People's Panel, it's gbnews.com/panel. Now, I hope that Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Cabinet Minister and the Tory MP for North East Somerset, and my fellow GB News presenter, joins me now. Jacob, good morning. Lovely to see you on the Sabbath. Now, let's talk about this 30% swing in your neighbouring seats, Somerton and Frome. You must be worried you're going to lose your seat, Jacob. What's your majority these days? After the boundary review, about 16,000. You're on the borderline here.
Yes, that's right. I think there's a very interesting and important piece in the Sunday Times by Peter Kellner, which looks at turnouts in the by-elections we've just had and turnouts in by-elections 92 to 97. If you look at the Lib Dem vote in Somerton and Frome, it's actually lower than they achieved in any election from 1997 to 2010. In 2010, they peaked at 28,000, and they got 21,000 in this election. The turnout, 92 to 97, averaged 70-ish%. Here it was about 45%.
Yes.
And it does seem as if Tories just stayed at home. Now, can we persuade Tories to go out to vote in the next general election? And here I think Uxbridge is really interesting and important, because if we get rid of things like ULEZ, which have popped up across the country, and we show we're on the side of the British voter, we stop burdening them with extra charges, extra regulations, extra interference in their life, then I think there's a real chance.
Jacob, this is top spinning from you, if I may say, because John Curtis, the pollster, has pointed out that actually, if you look at the by-election results as a whole, it represents a 21-point drop in the Conservative Party's support since the 2019 election. So there's no way that you can say that this is a good result for the Tories. It bodes very, very badly for the general election.
I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it indicates a chance of hope.
Okay.
And I'd point out that between 1987 to 1992, the Tories lost by-elections on huge swings. And then in 1992, we won every single seat that we'd lost at a by-election back. So by-elections don't necessarily predict what's going to happen in a general election. They do give an opportunity for governments to think about what they're doing and to see what works and what doesn't. What works is getting rid of unpopular, expensive green policies. And that's a real opportunity for us. We've got an energy bill before Parliament at the moment, which will pile endless costs on British consumers and businesses. We don't want to do that.
But then you've said about how, I think you said after the by-election result came through on Friday morning, it's really important that Tory MPs like me row in behind the Prime Minister, but you don't back a load of his policies. You don't back net zero.
Well,
you've argued about the retention of EU law bill being destroyed. You've also talked against corporation tax hikes. You've talked against his tax hikes. So you were a strident critic of Rishi Sunak, and now you're sucking up to him. Why is that? Desperation?
No, I'm supporting him as Prime Minister, but backbench MPs have to talk about policy and the way policy ought to be going. That's part of our role. It's part of our role of holding the government to account. But I'm supporting him as an individual, as the leader of the party, as the Prime Minister, to carry on being Prime Minister. I think that's very important. I think there is no prospect for the Tory party in changing leader. But these by-elections have shown us something very clearly, and that is we can win if we do things that are sensible and popular. And the Prime Minister is being absolutely excellent on the whole affair around Nigel Farage and the banks. Very clear, very straightforward, and we are not going to have a culture where, in the name of diversity and inclusion, you have your bank account closed.
We'll have a conversation about the banking situation in just a moment, but just on these policies that the Tories should therefore dump. Should he dump the net zero pledge? Should he dump the ban on petrol and diesel cars?
Well, I would certainly get rid of the pledge to get rid of petrol cars in 2030. That was done a few years ago in different circumstances. I would get rid of the plans in the energy bill to put extra charges on people and have extra certificates for people selling their houses, owning property, and so on. I would get rid of things that apply direct costs. Having a long-term ambition for net zero is different and working towards it, but we need to think about what other countries are doing, what is proportionate and what is affordable.
And on tax, Jacob, I've got one of my People's panellists today, Carl, saying, when will the government bring taxes down? I mean, it's a fair question that many, many people watching and listening to this want to know, and yet still we have prevarication from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister on this.
Well, no Chancellor or Prime Minister will ever say what taxes will be changed before a budget. You know that perfectly well. That's not prevarication, that's just the prudence of government. We've got to get spending down. And you were also talking to your People's panel, the wisdom of the viewers of GB News, about HS2.
Yeah.
Why don't we get rid of HS2? Get away from the sunk cost fallacy, stop it now, save that money. I would personally be strongly in favour of getting rid of inheritance tax and doing that before an election.
Hang on, Jacob.
Because it's a tax that's
You're meant to be supporting Sunak, and now you're trying to drive a steamroller through two of his main policies. The government supports continuing it.
No, I'm not. No. Yeah, but this isn't driving a steamroller through his policies. It's making points about policies that don't epitomise Rishi Sunak, do they? That he is not somebody who has ever stood up, as far as I'm aware, and said HS2 is the best thing since sliced bread. Nor has he said that inheritance tax, death duty, is one of the most important taxes that he really, really likes. What I'm doing is talking about policies in the perfectly normal way for backbenchers to do.
But I suppose from the audience's perspective, right, that the way they see it is this, and lots of people say this to me, you don't seem to agree because you're on the right of the party with a lot of your own government's policies. You're more aligned almost with what Nigel Farage and others are saying. Why don't you and people on the right just form a breakaway party that actually pursues conservative policies? You know, it's really hard for you. I feel sorry for you because you're having to come on here and justify policies that you simply don't agree with, and you're not proving popular at the ballot box because Tory voters don't agree with them either.
Well, it worked in Uxbridge because we were doing things that were popular and the sort of things that I'm talking about. The Tory party is my party. There's no way I would leave the Tory party. And it's always been a coalition. There have always been elements of the party that have wanted to go faster or slower. And that's the nature of our politics with a two-party system. Some countries have coalitions, and see the elections in Spain today, that are outside an individual party structure. We have coalitions within the Conservative Party and the Labour Party that lead to a government where nobody gets everything they like. That's always the way of politics, but that enough of it is what you like that you can support it as an entity, and that's certainly my position. And as I say, I support the Prime Minister strongly personally. Of course, there are some policies that I would encourage him to change, but the lesson of Uxbridge is that there are things we can change that will be electorally successful, and that's what's so fundamentally important. And they're in areas where I don't think the Prime Minister would be strongly opposed to what I'm saying, that if you look at his speeches over the years, his policy interests, he's never been a rabid net zeroite, has he?
No, that's right. But I'm afraid the government has the aura of being rabidly net zero. Let's move on to the banking thing, because I know that you did briefly touch on this when you wrote your Sunday Express column, which is in today's paper. Should the BBC apologise to Nigel Farage? It seems remarkable, doesn't it, that Simon Jack, the business editor there, doesn't seem to want to take responsibility for a badly sourced and incorrect story.
Well, we don't know whether it was badly sourced, do we? We now know that it was incorrect. But it may have been impeccably sourced. That it seems, and I hope she will come out and deny this, that the source comes from the chief executive of NatWest. Now, if you're the BBC and you get a story of that kind from the top of NatWest, you think it's true, and that's perfectly reasonable to have broadcast it then. Now it turns out it was untrue, and this leaves two questions. One, yes, of course the BBC should apologise when it gets a story wrong, but more importantly, the chief executive of NatWest, if she has broken the absolute code that bankers are discreet about their clients, if she's broken that, she must not remain a senior banker. She must resign.
She must resign. But how will we ever find that out?
She must.
Does Simon Jack need to oust his source?
No, of course not. You would never ask a fellow journalist to do that, and nor would I as a politician. She will know whether she's done it or not, and she must deny it if she hasn't, because otherwise it leaves an intolerable suspicion over her. And it's really important. Public figures know that a lot of what they say will be leaked and will be briefed, but we ought to be able to speak to our doctor and our bank manager in confidence.
Absolutely.
As ought everybody else.
Indeed. Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, there's lots more to come on today's show. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Jeremy Corbyn's former spin doctor, James Schneider. After Labour took Selby and Anstey on Thursday, you think that the Labour Party would be over the moon, but actually red-on-red infighting has once again broken out after they failed to win Uxbridge. We'll get his reaction to all of that just after the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was pretty gloomy with quite a bit of rain around, but what does today have in store? Well, across many parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Northern Wales especially, a pretty wet day to come with some heavy outbreaks of rain that could cause some localised disruption in places. Now either side of this, a brighter day with some sunny spells and maybe the odd shower, but for some central areas the odd heavier shower in there as well. But temperatures faring slightly better than yesterday with highs into the low 20s across southern parts of England and Wales. Now, as we go through this evening, that band of rain is going to slowly sink its way southwards. So some clearer spells in the far south to start the evening, but quickly clouding over with outbreaks of rain. Behind this, though, skies starting to clear, so a cool night to come here. Though further south, once again, those temperatures remaining in the low teens overnight. So to start the new week, another cloudy start for many parts of England and Wales with further outbreaks of rain. Maybe the odd heavier shower just ahead of this towards the south and east. So this could cause a little bit of localised disruption in places. Otherwise, a drier, brighter day to come, but feeling fresher and cooler as well with those temperatures remaining in the high teens, maybe just getting into the low 20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a moment, I'm going to be speaking to James Schneider, Jeremy Corbyn's former spin doctor. Should Sadiq Khan scrap ULEZ? And can Keir Starmer take back control of his warring party? I'll be putting all that and more to him just after the news with Tatiana Sanchez. Camilla, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Levelling Up Secretary is warning against treating the environment as a religious crusade as he calls for a relaxation of some net zero measures. In an interview with The Telegraph, Michael Gove said that inflexible rules lead to an inevitable backlash. The proposed expansion of the ultra-low emission zone was widely blamed for Labour failing to win the seats of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Chris Skidmore, who chaired the Tories' Net Zero review, argues that climate policies consistently poll third among issues voters care about, and ignoring those concerns would be bad politics. John Ashmore is the editor of CapEx, which is published by the Conservative think tank, the Centre for Policy Studies. He says the race to net zero has already gone too far.
Having arbitrary deadlines that are going to cost a lot for ordinary voters, especially at a time like now when so many people are struggling, is a pretty bad idea. And I think that's something that people probably can get behind. I agree with him when he talks about it being kind of quasi-religious thing. I mean, especially if you look at the more extreme ends of the environmental movement, it really is like a kind of, an end of the world doom cult. You look at people from Just Stop Oil and stuff, and their behaviour is literally like a religious one.
Thousands of people are fleeing homes and hotels on the Greek island of Rhodes after wildfires have swept the area. Emergency crews are still battling to bring the fires under control. It's all affected parts of Athens as well. Greece's climate crisis ministers urging people to remain on guard as temperatures continue to soar, with dangerously dry and windy conditions expected today. GB News spoke to a British tourist who was evacuated overnight.
We noticed sort of the middle of last week, lots of smoke coming over the mountains towards the sea where we were staying. The smoke sort of got thicker and thicker through the week.
And finally, more shops could be converted into homes and extensions made easier as the government launches a review of building rules. In proposals to be formally announced tomorrow, new freedoms to enlarge existing homes will also be outlined. The government says the idea is to make it easier to build upwards and outwards with new extensions and loft conversions. New measures will see shops, takeaways and betting shops turned into living spaces, with Michael Gove arguing that Britain must make better use of the buildings we already have. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. You're with GB News. Now it's back to Camilla. Welcome back. We're going to have lots more reaction to Thursday's by-election triple header. James Schneider, Jeremy Corbyn's former communications director, is going to be joining me in just a jiffy. Christine Jardine, the Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh West, will be with me, and I'll be speaking to Lee Rowley, Planning Minister. Where does the government go from here after Thursday's bloodbath? And we're going to have top expert analysis from the Conservative pollster Lord Robert Hayward and journalist John Rentoul. Now I'm joined by the former strategic and communications director for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. He's also co-founder of the Momentum Group, which was set up to support Jeremy Corbyn's leadership bid of the Labour Party. James, lovely to see you in the studio. Thank you for joining me. I wondered whether you saw Tony Blair interviewing Keir Starmer in the week. I'm just pointing to this interview in The Telegraph with Michael Gove, who described it as like a superstar and someone from a shabby tribute band. It's like seeing Mick Jagger and someone from the Counterfeit Stones, as it were. Do you agree with that analysis?
I mean, it is a bit first as tragedy, then as farce, unfortunately. I mean, Starmer and his team are pursuing a strategy quite similar to Blair in the 90s, but in extremely different conditions.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, when the economy is growing and it looks like it's set to grow, wages are rising. If you say we're going to stick to Tory spending plans for the first couple of years, you've still got more money coming in because tax receipts are going up, the economy is growing.
Yeah.
We're now in a condition where wages are at the level they were in 2005. We basically had 2 lost decades, not even 1 lost decade. So it doesn't fit. So it does feel like a tribute act, but not a particularly good one because the audience has changed.
But it's a better tribute act than Corbyn succeeded in winning support for, because actually, to be fair, under Starmer, Labour have done better in these by-elections than Corbyn ever did, right?
These are two, well, in one of the by-elections, absolutely fantastically, but it does show part of the problem in Labour's strategy, because these are some of the worst by-election results for a government ever, and rather than being on the front foot and Labour saying, right, and now this means we're on track for government and we're going to do A, B, C and D, they're having infighting and, you know, punching themselves in the face.
I still think that Corbyn would have done any better. I mean, Blair congratulated Starmer because he said what he'd ended was this existential crisis for the Labour Party and the way that the party was left after the annihilation of Corbyn in 2019.
No, I mean, obviously I completely disagree. What happened under Corbyn's leadership is that the Labour Party changed its position from being basically trying to be the nicer side of the establishment to trying to represent the majority of the people in the country, and we changed policy and we changed political debate, political direction.
Get the support of the majority of people in the country for that.
No, in the first election we fought, we got 13 million votes, and in the second election we had a terrible policy on Brexit, and we did badly. And also we did the average of how Labour have done in the last 10 elections, and the Tories did extremely well. And the key issue there was Brexit, and we had a bad policy on Brexit.
But why did Corbyn sort of flush his Brexit principles down the toilet then? Because he was a staunch Brexiteer from the very beginning.
So we were under... There wasn't a lot of support in the Labour Party for having what I would view to be a sensible Brexit policy. There are 2 possible policies you could have as Labour. Right? One is you say, we're Democrats, the EU isn't, in fact, the most wonderful thing that's ever existed, so we're leaving and we're going to find the most progressive Labour way to leave. That's one coherent one. The other one is you say, this is a disaster, and so we're going to make it the most Brexit in name only thing we can do, or if possible, overturn it. And the problem is we have both of those coming next to each other. And the first one, which I think is better both politically and also in outcome policy terms, I think it's more, it's more correct. That one would never had the strength in the party.
Yeah. On Corbyn himself, I mean, there's been a little bit of what I've described as a Corbynaissance. The chair of the Labour Party in Uxbridge resigned on Friday, sort of said that Jeremy Corbyn had done more for the party than Starmer had. We've now got talk of Corbyn perhaps running for London Mayor as an independent. Is that credible, those reports?
So I would really love to see, really love to see a radical mayor for London.
But will Corbyn do it, James?
I don't imagine so.
Why not?
Well, I mean,
he's not ruling it out. He's gone on the airwaves, and people keep asking him, and he's not ruling it out.
Well, he's not ruling out anything, but he doesn't need to be bounced into making a decision by Robert Peston or whoever is interviewing him.
Well, I mean, he can just say yes or no, whether he's doing it or whether he isn't. I mean, that would provide some clarity, right?
Yes, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's allowed to make his own choices in his own time, I think.
Should he have the Labour whip restored, do you think?
I think it's very unlikely given what's happened, but I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, he shouldn't have had it removed in the first place. I mean, I don't support in any way, shape or form Keir Starmer's war on the left, on the trade unions, on the membership of the party.
Well, has he waged war on the trade unions? I mean, you know...
Yeah, so yesterday, the GMB, who've always supported him, walked out of the National Policy Forum that they're having at the moment, partly because, according to the briefings, his office was being rude to them while they were rowing back on some key policies to do with workers' rights. So he has, he has done that. He said that people couldn't go and stand, his people couldn't go and stand on picket lines after winning the leadership election on the basis of standing shoulder to shoulder with the trade unions.
So what are you saying? You think he's betraying the left? He's betraying his own voters by not showing solidarity with the strikers?
Well, he won...
Jamie Driscoll situation.
Yeah, I mean, you see all of that...
He wasn't allowed to stand because he was a Corbynista.
Yeah, because he was already... He was already mayor. Starmer won the Labour leadership election on a programme which said, look, we'll shave off about 20% of the Corbyn programme and I'll wear a suit and I'll be less able to be attacked by the media because I'm more of an establishment figure and I'm going to do this well. And then he has, bit by bit, gone in the other direction, changed all of those policies. So that is the programme on which he won the election on. The leadership election. It's also would be a good programme to go to the public on. I mean, if you look at the polling of most of those policies, they poll, often the majority of Tory voters like those things, and then the supermajority of other voters. But that's not his strategy. His strategy is let the Tories implode and take over. So he wants the minimum amount of friction possible, which is why there isn't really very much of a narrative. If you look at Blair at this time in opposition, he's set out the 5 pledges that are going to dominate the election. There's a clear narrative about what he's doing. The reason after these historic terrible by-elections for the Tory party, Labour aren't coming out and saying, we're about this now and we're going to get into government, but instead of talking about, oh, our mayor lost our own election campaign, oh, we're trying, we haven't fought the left enough, all of this infighting, because there isn't a clear narrative.
But on ULEZ, they're right, aren't they? I mean, shouldn't Khan just scrap ULEZ because it's not popular with people in London? And Angela Rayner, do you agree with Angela Rayner when she said Londoners can't afford this?
No, I don't. I think this is, again, you fall into the defensive narrative, which is what Labour...
Yeah, but hang on, you're meant to be representative of the working people, and it's working people who are saying, we can't afford this, I'm driving a white van, I'm a nurse doing shift work, I can't pay £12.50 to go in and out of outer London.
So I agree that there could be and should be some changes to the policy. I think the money that's raised from it should go straight into the scrappage scheme, so it's presented as a positive to people, and you could do it in particular categories. If you're self-employed and you need to drive for work, then you get privileged position to get a new car or get financing for a new car. There are ways in which you could improve the policy, and I don't think the comms around it and the framing has been particularly good. But to win one by-election massively, to come close in another one which you haven't held ever before, and to make the main takeaway, oh no, we need to self-flagellate, is not very clever politics.
You're not a big fan of Starmer at all, are you? Who would you rather led the Labour Party?
I probably shouldn't say almost anyone, should I? Almost anyone, yeah.
Really?
Almost anyone, yeah.
Well, who? Would you prefer to see Angela Rayner in charge?
I'd prefer to see Angela Rayner. I would prefer to see Ed Miliband. I'd prefer to see Lucy Powell. I'd prefer to see Jonathan Ashcroft. I mean, there are a lot of them.
Do you think Starmer's actually going to cost Labour the next election? I mean, in terms of they're looking like they've got a good chance of winning it, being 20-plus points ahead. But do you think as a personality and as a politician he's a dud?
I don't think he's going to cost them the election because living standards in this country have been falling now for, almost 2 decades. The conditions that people are in are really, really bad, and I think it's very unlikely that a government that's been in power for 14, 15 years at that point gets re-elected. But do I think that Starmer is a net positive onto that Labour vote? No, I don't think so.
OK. James Schneider, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Let's bring Michael Portillo into the conversation. I mean, it's a damning indictment of Starmer and Starmer's politics here by James Schneider, perhaps to be expected because he's Jeremy Corbyn's former spin doctor and very much on the left of the party. What's your analysis of Starmer after the by-election results, particularly with Uxbridge in mind, Michael?
Well, funnily enough, I agree with a lot of James's analysis. I thought he was spot on in some ways. I mean, it is rather extraordinary to find a Labour Party that doesn't want to talk about what it would like to do in government. And it is certainly true that the conditions in which Labour would take over if they win the next election are not at all promising and extremely different from the 1997 conditions. I was taken back not so much to Tony Blair as to Harold Wilson. When he resigned, he was asked what was his greatest achievement. And he said, at the time rather puzzlingly, keeping the Labour Party together had been his greatest achievement. Keeping the Labour Party together is an enormous problem. By the way, keeping the Tory party together is also an enormous problem. These parties have to cover a very broad range of interests and policies. But I was also struck that James himself, if I may say so, got into a bit of a mess over ULEZ because obviously even James is a bit panicked by ULEZ. And the idea that we're going to set up some vast bureaucracy in front of which you have to prove whether you're self-employed and you need this van, and that's going to be more meritorious than the fact that you just have to buy food for your children at a supermarket, which is a drive-away. I mean, this is a bureaucratic nightmare. And absolutely the sort of socialist solution that you expect to a problem like this.
But of course, Tories in London will be hoping that Khan digs in his heels and carries on with it, because it might give them a hope.
Absolutely.
I mean, at the moment, London for the Tories isn't looking particularly hopeful.
No, ULEZ is the Tories' only hope. Oh, no, there's a second hope. If Jeremy Corbyn also runs, so there are two effectively Labour candidates. Not a ringing
endorsement. James seems to be ruling that out on behalf of his former boss.
Well, I'd like him to go back to his former boss and plead with him to stay.
Now, let's have a discussion about who you've got on the show today from 11, Michael.
Well, I'm dipping back in time a bit as well, because I've got Peter Shilton, the goalkeeper, coming on to talk about his addiction to gambling. We're going to have an ethical debate about what restrictions there should be on gambling. Bobby Davro is coming on. Not, I think, to do an impersonation of John Major, but I might persuade him.
Brilliant. Get him to do any impressions he can. I love Bobby Davro.
But he's going to the Edinburgh Fringe, can you believe it, for the first time in his life. We're going to be looking at a very tough play about Grenfell, the words of the survivors. And I went to see an exhibition by a Ukrainian folk artist whose museum in Ukraine was destroyed immediately by the Russians because they're trying to annihilate Ukrainian culture. But her works are on display in London. I've been to see the exhibition.
Amazing. Sounds like a jam-packed show. We'll be looking forward to that at 11. Lovely to see you, Michael, and to see you as well, James. Thank you very much. Now, I'm very much hoping that we're going to be speaking to Christine Jardine now, Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh West, after their, well, great victory, to be fair to you, Christine, in Somerton and Frome. You must be delighted.
Yes, we are delighted, and it's actually the first time since the mid-90s that an opposition party has won 4 by-elections in the course of one parliament, and that was the Liberal Democrats under Paddy Ashdown. It was the start of a very successful period, and we think this will be too, because as we saw in Tiverton and Honiton, in rural areas, lifelong Conservatives are now voting Liberal Democrat because they don't like what the Conservatives are doing. But they want something done about the NHS, they want something done about the lack of GPs and about public services.
But do they like what you're doing, Christine? I ask that because you have got this great result there, but it's as a result of tactical voting. Sir Ed Davey, your party leader, has admitted that today in The Observer. It's also as a result of low turnout. So people aren't actively voting for Lib Dem policies, are they? In fact, I don't think many people watching or listening to this can name any Lib Dem policies.
You know what? We've won 4 by-elections. 4 times recently, people in Conservative seats have gone to the polls and elected a Liberal Democrat. Now, you can try and pick holes in that whichever way you want and say it's tactical voting or people are not unhappy with the Conservatives. The fact is that given the choice of electing another Conservative MP, they have opted instead to have a Liberal Democrat MP, because they know that a Liberal Democrat MP will work hard, is based in the community, and that they will get the sort of representation which certainly in Somerton and Frome they've been missing out on, and that Sarah Dyke will now provide. So the fact is that people are choosing Liberal Democrats.
But Christine, tell me something. What are your top 3 policies? Because I'm genuinely unclear as to what the Liberal Democrats are pushing for these days.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to unveil our manifesto at this point, but we will have.
Christine, I'm not asking you to unveil a manifesto. I just want to know 3 top Lib Dem
If you let me finish
policies.
the answer. If you let me finish the answer,
Okay.
you know, people see that in Parliament, what we are doing is we are pushing for better public services, for more investment in public services. We were the very first people to come up with a windfall tax in this country. We suggested it before the Labour Party because we could see the energy companies were making vast profits while people were struggling to heat their homes. We did that. We uncovered the problem with sewage in this country being spilled into rivers, and we have policies for that. We have policies for supporting mortgage payers at the moment. We asked for a mortgage support scheme. We were the ones who called for the supermarkets to be brought to the table to talk about their pricing. So, I mean, what do you want me to do? I can tell you everything that we plan for.
A bit more meat on the bones, I think.
You can try and pick holes in it, but when we go to the polls, when we talk to voters, they like what we say, they like what we do. We've won, we were the big winners in the local council elections in a lot of rural constituencies in England.
Yeah.
So, you know, you may not know what the policies are. I completely accept that, but the people who vote for it,
but you're saying you don't want to reveal.
are happy.
You're saying you don't want to reveal your main policies. Like, you've given me a kind of like, you've kind of given me some sound bites about where the general direction of travel is, windfall tax, you alerted people to pollution in rivers, etc. But, you know, where do you stand on grammar schools? Are you going to make a pledge to scrap tuition fees again? Where would you like our taxes to be? What should happen to inflation? Do you want different governance of the Bank of England? What are you going to do about crime? What is the Liberal Democrats going to do about any of these subjects?
All of that will be in our manifesto at the next general election. But if you listen to what we say in Parliament, it's very clear where we stand on every issue that the country is facing at the moment, that we believe strongly that something has to be done about the cost of living, that something has to be done about the economy, that something has to be done about the state of our NHS. We need to be able for people to get GPs when they need them, to get ambulances when they need them,
yes,
for the pressure to be taken off our teaching staff. Now, we have been talking about our policies for 5 years now. We've been asking the government to make changes. We wanted to make serious changes with the windfall tax, use that money to invest in our services. So when it comes to a general election, we will reveal our policies for the next 5 years in our manifesto. But like the other parties, we're not going to do it right now. If there is a by-election, then we will another by-election in mid-Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
We are confident that the people there will agree with us in the same way that the people have in Somerton and Frome, in Tiverton, in North Shropshire, and back in Chesham and Amersham.
Christine, we're running out of time, so I just need a yes-no answer to the following question. Will you do a pact with Labour at the next general election, yes or no?
No.
OK, thank you for that. Christine Jardine, lovely to speak to you this Sunday morning. Thank you very much. In just a minute, we'll get the government's reaction to those 2 bruising by-election defeats when I speak to Planning Minister Lee Rowley. Don't go anywhere.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was pretty gloomy with quite a bit of rain around. But what does today have in store? Well, across many parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Northern Wales especially, a pretty wet day to come with some heavy outbreaks of rain that could cause some localised disruption in places. Now, either side of this, a brighter day with some sunny spells and maybe the odd shower, but for some central areas, the odd heavier shower in there as well. But temperatures faring slightly better than yesterday with highs into the low 20s across southern parts of England and Wales. Now, as we go through this evening, that band of rain is going to slowly sink its way southwards. So some clearer spells in the far south to start the evening, but quickly clouding over with outbreaks of rain. Behind this, though, sky is starting to clear, so a cool night to come here. Though further south, once again, those temperatures remaining in the low teens overnight. So to start the new week, another cloudy start for many parts of England and Wales with further outbreaks of rain. Maybe the odd heavier shower just ahead of this towards the south and east. So this could cause a little bit of localised disruption in places. Otherwise, a drier, brighter day to come, but feeling fresher and cooler as well, with those temperatures remaining in the high teens, maybe just getting into the low 20s.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, we're being greeted by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to see you this morning. Now, Lee Rowley, the Minister for Local Government and Building Safety, joins me now. He's also the Tory MP for North East Derbyshire. Minister, lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you for sparing the time. Let's have a look at this interesting interview with Michael Gove in the Sunday Telegraph. I'm going to ask you about the government's announcement on housing in just a moment. But Michael Gove says net zero can't become a crusade. Should the government now back off from net zero and its target? Should it tear up its green pledges, as some Tories are suggesting in the aftermath of the Uxbridge by-election particularly?
No, I think we've got a clear policy of trying to get to net zero by 2050. I think everybody, wherever they live, whatever their thoughts are on this, wants us to tread more lightly on the earth, to have greater respect for the environment. But what I think Michael is trying to say is that there's a group of activists out there, and quite frankly, a group of people in like the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, who just say things, one, that just are fundamentally not true, just stop oil and the like. They do really silly things. And three, they're taking no account of the track record which we've got, which is pretty good, and all the plans which we've got to go forward. So this is about trying to do this in a way which takes people with us, rather than some of the things like just stop oil, which, are just crazy.
I'd also wanted to ask you, Minister, on the back of the announcement that Gove is set to make tomorrow, he's talking about a loosening, in a way, of planning laws to allow people to have more extensions, more loft conversions, to make better use of their homes. Isn't the biggest concern on housing the fact that the government set this target to build 300,000 homes and just isn't meeting it? Successive governments have failed on this issue. How many houses is the current government building a year?
I think the last figures were 242,000, I think, which is the highest in 30 years. So we are demonstrating we're making a lot of progress on this. But the importance behind house building is so that it gives people the ability to own their own homes, to get on the housing ladder, to make sure that people can build capital, can start a family, and that's hugely important. So we've made some progress, but there's more to do, which is why Michael's going to announce tomorrow some further changes, which hopefully will build more homes, but also vitally build them in the right places.
Do you think people are right to be concerned that this might kind of give carte blanche to people to build monstrosities on their homes if the planning laws are going to be relaxed? Obviously, you might be concerned that people are going to build inappropriately large extensions, are going to convert lofts that shouldn't be converted, and all the rest of it.
There's always a balance on this, and I can understand why people are concerned. But we brought in some changes about a decade ago or so, I think, and that allowed people to build upwards in certain places and certain properties, and I think it's worked relatively well. We brought in some changes, again, to allow conversions of offices and shops to houses, and again, that's worked pretty well. Brought on near enough 100,000 houses in the last 7 years. So I think the record is relatively positive, and what we now need to do is to try and allow more to happen there, to give people more choice. And if we give people more choice, it allows people to get more on the housing ladder, as I say, and then to build their lives. And that's exactly what we want to do as a Conservative government.
You've seen this backlash against the ULEZ in London. The thought is that the Tories have retained Uxbridge on the back of people not being happy with that policy by Sadiq Khan. There's now talk of this purging of some of your green pledges. You've dealt with net zero. What about this ban on diesel and petrol cars come 2030? It's not popular with the electorate. It might be popular with the Green lobby, but isn't this one of those policies that you also need to get rid of in a bid to try and win the next general election?
I don't think so. I think what we need to do, Boris Johnson announced this, whatever it was, 2-3 years ago, and he said by 2030 we'll set an ambitious target to try and do this. I think we've made some really positive progress to it. I think rolling off the forecourts last year, 25% of new cars were electric. So that's a huge increase from a few years before. And again, it's about doing this in a way that works. So we've got a target. Let's all go and try and do as much as we can to get there. But more broadly, what the ULEZ message showed in Uxbridge on Friday is if you don't take people with you, if you do things without due consideration, as Sadiq Khan has done, if you don't think through your policies, the Labour Party clearly aren't, then people will say, I don't think so. So the job of government is to take people with us and to try and hit these ambitious targets, but also do it in a way which works.
Have you got an electric car?
Nope, I haven't. I've got a diesel. I bought it in 2008 and I'm going to keep it going until it stops working. Because
I thought we're all meant to be doing our bit.
That's a great example of where the discussion on these kind of things needs to be more nuanced. Where people are wanting to change their cars, hopefully lots of people will move to electric. That's happening because it's cleaner for the environment in the way that works. But also where you have a car already, you've got a lot of energy that was created to create that car. you should try and use it as long as possible.
Let's have a look at other kind of unpopular government policies that have actually been pinpointed by David and Carl, who are on my People's panel this week up in Selby. They were Tory voters, but they've gone across to Labour because they're fed up. Carl was asking, when are you going to bring taxes down, first of all?
Well, we'd love to bring taxes down as soon as we're able to, hopefully. And the Chancellor's been clear, as is the Prime Minister, that we want to do that. We're a low tax party. It's not where we are comfortable when taxes are higher than we want them to be. But we've also got a series of challenges. We've just spent the best part of £500 billion on COVID and on trying to tackle inflation and energy. That will have the reality is that will have an impact. But I think what the government is trying to do is balance all of those things off. We have to also get debt reducing. These are really important things for our children and our grandchildren. But yeah, we'd love to reduce taxes, but people also want the government to be responsible and to be clear with that these are. They also want the government to be clear with them that there are hard times and hard choices, and we're trying to make those. But as soon as we're able to do that,
in autumn, when the Chancellor gives his autumn statement, should they be brought down then?
Well, I can't speak for the Chancellor. We'll have to wait till the autumn. We'd love to bring taxes down. It's one of the reasons why I went into politics. But we have to do it in a way which works. If we cut taxes and the debt goes up, that causes other problems. So we have to try and balance all of these things out.
And one more question, Minister. It was raised by Jacob Rees-Mogg earlier in the show, and also David, our panellist. He wants HS2 to be scrapped. What do you reckon?
I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, HS2 has, the tunnels are basically built. The land has basically been cleared. I know, but it's not going to come to London. That's a gross error, isn't it? It's not going to come to London for another 7 years. Well, all of these big infrastructure projects take time. We'd like to speed them up. We've announced some, by the way, some ways in which we're trying to speed up big infrastructure projects. But HS2 is now on its way. We need to deliver that big infrastructure. It puts a huge amount of additional capacity onto our railways. And this is about trying to get that capacity in place. I know it's not popular in places, get that infrastructure in place, which makes our country fit for the next 50 years. Lee Rowley, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Well, Catherine, you can't say that I don't ask the People's panellist questions to the people we have on the show. What have Dave and indeed Carl made of my interviews this morning, Catherine in Selby?
Yes, thank you, Camilla, and welcome back to the Hub in Selby. Yes, you did ask the questions. Let's see what they made of the answers. Carl, we heard no tax cuts expected at least this autumn. We do, of course, have a national debt now of, I think, £2.6 trillion. Yeah. Do you accept that maybe it's not the time for tax cuts?
Absolutely, but I think what we were saying this morning, David and myself, people who were advisors. I mean, James has asked questions there about the scrapping of the transport scheme in London, the cost of it. And he said, oh, the government with the money should be taken continually, and then we'll set up a new scrappage scheme. What about the costs of that? They don't seem to have any sort of knowledge about how business works and keeping costs down, just setting up more schemes and more. And they just don't seem to be in the real world.
Not in the real world. And David, we were hearing a lot about housing, the plans to liberalise the planning laws, make it easier to convert spaces above shops, etc. You had a lot to do with planning on the local council. What do you make of the plans?
Yeah, I can see the benefit to maybe small extensions, loft conversions, but my worry would be that if they were going to convert too many shops into accommodation, I approve putting accommodation above shops, but I don't want to see the downfall of the high street, and that'll only create people using out-of-town shops.
The high street is having a very difficult time at the moment, isn't it? Really struggling up and down the country. And Carl, back to you. Listening to Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about banking, specifically what's happened with Nigel Farage. Obviously, as an accountant, you have a lot to do with banks. What's your view on that?
Well, I used to do when there was branches open. Of course, a lot of the managers have gone because they've closed the branches. I think it's true the banks are there to lend money to people, not decide who can have an account and who can't have an account. I mean, I know someone recently has been trying for 6 months with one of the banks to try and get the son added to the account. And it's just bureaucracy and red tape and just a shambles. And it's because they've closed there's no personal contact anymore. And they just treat people with contempt, really. But I think influencing who can have accounts and who can't, it's nothing to do with the banks. As I say, what will happen next? Will they start doing that in shops when you go in? If you have a particular view, they won't serve you.
Yeah, people used to have a local relationship with their bank manager, didn't they? And that has gone, and big consequences for people now. Yes. And back to you, David, on transport. Obviously, we had Jacob Rees-Mogg freelancing on government policy, basically saying let's scrap the whole of HS2, not just the link to Leeds. What do you reckon to that?
Yeah, I think now they've started it, I don't think they should scrap it entirely, but they made a huge mistake in my opinion. They should have started in the north where it was most needed, and the benefit then they would have kept voters. It would have got more confidence. The south, as you're aware yourself, has got a very good transport link. The north hasn't, and HS2 would have made a big difference. So I don't agree with him about scrapping it because there's too much money being spent on it already, but I do think they need to commit more to the north and level up, or they're going to lose voters.
16 million people live in the north of England, and millions of those feeling very shortchanged, aren't they?
It'd be good if we had some buses to start with, never mind HS2. You know, the transport systems are terrible, and often you can't use them, you have to use a car.
Yeah, very reliant on cars, and obviously the cost of fuel and everything that goes with that. And finally, the Conservatives, Labour, are fighting very publicly now about green policy, but lots of factions within the Conservative Party, all with their different ideas of what Rishi Sunak should be doing. Have they got any chance if they don't come together, David?
No, they need to work as a team, and they're not. They're disjointed at the moment, and that's really what's letting them down. I'm not saying any of the other parties are any better at the moment, but they need clear policies and stick with it. It's like running a business. You know, you need to run it as a business better.
Wise words from our People's panel here in Selby. They need to pull it together and be united and clear policies. Back to you, Camilla.
Great job in Selby, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. And don't forget, if you want to apply to the People's Panel, it's gbnews.com/panel. Now, don't go anywhere, because we've got some expert analysis on the way from two top political analysts. We'll be back before you know it.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I've been very much looking forward to this part of the show because we're going to have some top analysis of what went on Thursday and what it all means for the next general election. So I'm joined by Lord Robert Hayward, Tory peer pollster, an expert on all things Conservative. And I'm also the Independent's chief political columnist, and I'm saying an expert on all things Labour. So we've got blue and red represented on this sofa very nicely. Let's just first of all make some analysis of how important these by-elections are when it comes to the next general election. Robert, I mean, do they signify much? A week's a long time in politics. The next election could be 16 months away.
For the next general election, the answer's no. But for the next few months, they set the mood. Because we're now in recess, well, the Commons are, the peers don't go into recess till next week. But we're in recess, and therefore the mood until the party conferences has been set by these by-elections.
John, how good has it been for Labour? Obviously, they've had this stellar success in Selby.
Yeah.
And yet all of the newspapers are reflecting on this row between Starmer and Khan over the ULEZ. We've heard from James Schneider earlier in the show that there's disaffection amongst the GMB union over Starmer being, frankly, too right-wing, they think, on strikes and protests. Where are Labour? How would you characterise them now?
Oh, well, I mean, I think Selby was the significant result. I mean, that was a Blair-era result. It was better than some of the by-election swings that Tony Blair achieved before the 97 election. And that is extraordinary to me, given the lack of excitement and charisma around Keir Starmer. It just shows how badly the Conservatives have made a mess of things.
But if there
recently.
was more excitement around Keir Starmer, would it be a better result? I mean, people often talk about, is it 92, is it 97?
Well, it's much more 97 than 92, I think. But the whole point about Uxbridge...
But they're not passionate about Starmer. I mean, I wrote a column about this on Saturday. Probably hasn't gone
And so
down
did
well.
I.
Said nobody wants Keir Starmer to be Prime Minister.
That's not true.
Come on, John. Nobody. It's not like the Blair era where people are lining the streets to meet this bloke. They don't find him particularly inspiring, Starmer.
No, and the Uxbridge by-election was a warning of what could happen over the next 16 months if people think that, a vote for Labour is going to cost them.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. If people think that a Labour government is going to raise taxes, then that Labour lead is a bit soft.
Robert.
I was going to say, Selby is a very good result for Labour, no question. But it's more because the Conservative vote went down dramatically.
Yes.
The Labour vote didn't go up by even 3,000 votes. The turnout was low by midsummer by-election standards. So, yes, it is a great result for the Labour Party, as is Somerton and Frome for the Lib Dems. But it is not something that says it's absolutely clear, because, as you're saying, there's not a great love for the Labour Party or for Keir Starmer at the moment. Yes. And that's the one hope that the Conservatives have got, is that they can transform the perception of the Tories from being a government at war with itself over the last 2 years, over Partygate and the like, and move on to a good, competent administration.
Well, let's talk about what each side needs to do, because the suggestion in the papers today, Robert, first of all, with the Tories, is that they need to kind of lurch more rightwards. They need to have a bonfire of all of their green policies, that they need to bring tax down, they need to be tougher on immigration. Everyone's welcoming Rishi Sunak's tough stance when it comes to Farage's banking situation. Is that the right direction of travel? Will that gain them votes?
No, the first thing they have to do is be able to put behind in the public's mind the events of the last 2 years, effectively show that they are a good administration. The government had good inflation figures. There were good retail figures hidden by the by-election results this week as well. They have to continue on that at the same time as dealing with the migration bill, which has now passed Parliament, etc. So the first message is not to go in for a mass of policies. It's just to be a good administration, which unfortunately the government hasn't been for the last few months or years.
And John, on Starmer, there's this talk that he just needs to kind of, you know, hold the Ming vase in his hand and not let it break and not say very much, not put out a policy platform, just leave the Tories to implode. The danger of that is he seems very much soundbite over substance.
Well, but that's fine.
Is it? Is it fine?
And what is even better is what's happening in Nottingham this weekend, which is there's you know, people criticising him and attacking him and having a go at him for not wanting to spend enough and not wanting to give the trade unions what they want. The more of that we hear, the better from Keir Starmer's point of view. He has got to persuade the British public, the floating voter, that he is not going to just spend money and raise taxes.
But what about the James Schneider factor, if I can call it that? You know, this disaffection from some in the left of the party.
Absolutely not a problem.
James Driscoll and all the rest
it's great.
of it.
The more of that we have, the more of that Keir Starmer has, the better.
But then you're saying that Keir Starmer positions himself as a righty in a left-wing party, effectively, to keep everyone happy.
Well, you know, it's the Tony Blair lesson.
I get that. But doesn't that only work if you do have the charisma of Tony Blair? I've had Michael Gove this morning calling him a shabby tribute act.
Well, that'll do. You know, I mean, I don't think people really want another Tony Blair. Actually, I think they'd be perfectly satisfied with someone who's competent and boring.
On competence and boring, that's kind of a description that you could apply to the Prime Minister as well, right?
Yes.
Rishi Sunak, steady as he goes. You know, I'm competent. I'm working hard behind the scenes. Is that what Tory voters actually want? Because at the moment, he's not encouraging them to come out for him. They're staying at home.
They are, and having said that, there was a very positive response to his renegotiation of the Windsor Framework. He's got the migration legislation through.
Was there a positive response to that?
Yes, there was. If you look
at it.
Oh yeah, they didn't understand the Windsor Framework per se, but if you look at the sort of people who responded in the opinion polls to the fact that he was tackling what hadn't been tackled, which was all the leftover tales of Brexit in one direction or another.
Yeah, that seemed as if he had kind of actually...
It was a message. I've worked on it. I've got the detail. I've delivered a sensible agreement with the EU on this particular field. The trouble is, there's a lot of other things to do, and also, particularly, the economy stroke cost of living, which in all opinion polls comes out as the prime concern for voters of whatever political persuasion.
Still the economy stupid and not this kind of battle of personalities then? Because we've got two politicians at the helm who seem to be lacking in that kind of Boris Johnson stroke personality.
Well, I think Rishi Sunak, I think he's being a bit unfair. I think he's got a bit more personality than Keir Starmer. But actually, I mean, the question is, can the economy be turned around in time? And I think there's got to be a very big question mark over that. And how short are the voters' memories? Because, I mean, there's no doubt that Liz Truss episode did so much damage to the Conservative brand. I mean, I hadn't really realised, because I thought, you know, it only lasted 7 weeks. Rishi Sunak came in and sorted everything out and put everything right, and yet the damage done to the Conservative Party's reputation runs so deep.
So you are saying that it is like 97. So are you predicting an absolute bloodbath? I mean, we know that...
Well, no, because Labour starts from so much further back,
okay.
Actually. That I mean, it's what Keir Starmer said to Tony Blair at the Blair Fest last week, was that if he gets a Tony Blair swing at the next election, that gives him a majority of 1. Yeah. It's not quite right, because Scotland's shifted, but it means a small Labour majority.
We've got less than a minute left. A very quick report card, as it's the summer holidays. What grade would you give Rishi Sunak, Robert?
C. Needs to keep on trying at what the route he's following.
John, what report card would you give to Keir Starmer?
I'd give him a B+. I mean, I think he's done an astonishing job. I mean, everybody's underestimated him.
Right, fair enough. Very enlightened conversation, gents. Thank you very much on this Sunday morning for joining me, Robert Hayward and John Rentoul. Well, that's it for me for today. As I said, we're going to be here with you through the whole of summer, unlike our competitors, so please do stay tuned. Up next is Michael Portillo. I'll be back next week at 9:30, but first, more weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. We hold on to unsettled weather conditions across the UK over the next few days, all of us seeing some rain at times and temperatures pretty disappointing for the time of year too. It's all down to a deep area of low pressure centred across the UK at the moment, a slow-moving band of rain affecting the central slice of the UK, and that will continue to bring heavy bursts of rain to parts of northern England, the north of Wales as we head into the afternoon on Sunday. In fact, we have a warning in force right through the day on the Sunday here, up to 70 millimetres rain across some of the hills of northern England. To the south and southeast it's brighter with a few showers, and brighter, fresher weather, again with a few showers across the north of Scotland. Temperature-wise, we're peaking in the mid-teens towards the north, perhaps 20 degrees towards the west of Scotland, with a high of 23 towards the southeast of England. As we go into the evening and overnight, that band of rain continues its journey south. Again, there'll be some heavy bursts of rain in places, a warning in force until midnight tonight. Towards the far southeast, clearer skies with a few showers, and clearer with a few showers towards the north of Scotland too. Quite fresh in the north, temperatures here 9 to 11 Celsius, whereas towards the south and southeast it's pretty warm, temperatures here holding up in the mid-teens. As for Monday, well, it's the south of the UK, we'll see the wettest weather, still some heavy bursts of rain in places, could see a bit of brightness towards the far southeast, triggering a few heavy showers here, but all in all, brighter, fresher weather starting to push in from the north, tucking into most places as we go through the day. Temperatures again struggling for the time of year, no better than 20 degrees towards the south of the UK.